She never imagined that a simple walk would make her the target of an absurd accusation. A police officer accused her of robbery just because she was black, but what happened when the truth came out will leave you speechless and full of anger. Get ready to discover the unexpected. The morning was radiant in the central square, but for Maria, everything seemed to be about to fall apart. Age 22 and dressed in a white blouse and jeans, she waited patiently for her father, while the square was buzzing with people coming and going. Children played, street vendors advertised their products, and the city's routine continued normally. However, everything changed in an instant. What do you think happened? Your opinion. Police officer Helena, middle-aged and with a cold look, appeared in the middle of the movement. For no clear reason, she approached Maria, claiming to have received a report of a robbery in the area. Upon seeing her alone, Helena decided that she was the suspect. Without thinking twice, he started searching his bag, drawing the attention of passers-by who observed the scene with suspicion. "What are you accusing me of?" asked Maria, trying to remain calm, but her indignation was visible. The officer, with a firm but wavering tone, responded, "We received a report of a robbery and you fit the description." The square, which before was just a place of leisure, now became the scene of an injustice that left everyone silent, but Maria was unable to contain her anger. The accusation without evidence left her groundless, and the worst was yet to come. If this happened to you, how would you react? Write in the comments. Maria knew she needed to remain calm, but the situation was becoming untenable. He tried to explain that he was just waiting for his father, but police officer Helena seemed determined to find something that would incriminate her. Meanwhile, the surrounding square began to vibrate with murmurs. Some defended police action, others clearly saw a case of racism. Tension was in the air, and Maria felt her heart racing. He looked around, waiting for someone to intervene, but the fear of getting involved paralyzed everyone around him. The biting wind swayed the trees around the square, bringing with it a palpable sense of urgency. The sound of rustling leaves mixed with the growing murmurs of the crowd, making the atmosphere more tense with each passing second. Maria, with her heart pounding in her chest, felt panic take over her body. The police officer's words of accusation echoed in her mind like a cry of despair, and without thinking twice, she picked up her cell phone with shaking hands. His finger pressed his father's number with almost automatic speed. "Dad, I'm in the square, and a police officer is accusing me of robbery. Please come quickly." Maria tried to keep her voice firm, but the tears were already beginning to threaten to fall, mixing with the feeling of helplessness that was suffocating her. The fear was so great that her vision became blurry and she could barely think clearly. How was it possible that this was happening? She, a dedicated student with dreams of a career in the public prosecutor's office, being accused of something so terrible and unfair. And do you think the police acted correctly or exaggerated? Comment yes or noon, the other end of the line. Ricardo's voice was a solid and firm foundation. He sensed the urgency and fear in her words and immediately put everything aside to act. "Stay calm, daughter. I'm on my way. Stay close to the others. Keep a cool head. I'll sort this out." His father's words, although reassuring, failed to take away the weight of the situation. Maria felt even more vulnerable, waiting for the relief of her father's presence. Helena, however, was at the center of it all. Her stance of authority seemed unshakable to anyone observing, but deep down she felt a growing uneasiness. The police officer she had become, the image she represented, no longer seemed as clear as before. Something in Maria's reaction, something in the young woman's words, made a shadow of doubt cross her face. What was she doing? Would it be wrong? The pressure of work, the expectations of her superiors, the need for quick results, all pushed her towards immediate action. But that moment, the uncertainty in Maria's eyes, made her confidence waver. The surrounding crowd was starting to stir, the looks of disapproval becoming more intense. The murmurs grew louder, and the tension in the air became almost palpable. Helena could feel the weight of other people's expectations, and that only made her feel more pressured. The audience around her seemed ready to explode, and she knew that if she didn't act quickly, the situation could spiral out of control. Anxiety and the feeling of being watched from every angle were taking over her. What to do? Maintain your posture of authority and continue the accusation, or question your own perception and try to understand what was really happening. The internal struggle between doing the right thing and following protocol was becoming more and more intense. It's getting out of control, thought Helena, feeling the weight of the consequences of her next steps. She knew that something had to change, but the pressure of the moment, the crowd, the fear of being judged, all of this prevented her from seeing clearly the path to follow. But at that moment, one thing was certain. The decision she made would not only shape Maria's life, but also her own personal and professional journey. If you want to know how Helena faced this decision and the impact it had, be sure to follow the development of this story. The fight for the truth has just begun, and what happens next will change everything. That was when Ricardo, a tall and imposing man, appeared in the square. Known for his fight for human rights, he was there in the blink of an eye after his daughter called him. His determined look and firm stance left no doubt that he would not remain silent. When he saw his daughter being treated like a criminal, a fire of indignation took over him. "What's going on here?" he questioned, his voice filled with authority and concern. Police officer Helena, who until then had maintained her rigid posture, faltered when she saw who was in front of her. "We received a report of a robbery, and your daughter fits the description." Officer Helena spoke, trying to remain firm, but her voice wavered. Tension was in the air, and the attentive crowd around them began to realize that something was not right. Ricardo, with a penetrating look, approached. "My daughter has nothing to do with this. She's here for an internship interview at the district attorney's office, and you're wrongly accusing her." His voice exuded authority, and the crowd, divided between silence and murmurs, began to support his defense. Helena felt the weight of Ricardo's words like a crushing pressure in her chest. Every sentence he uttered seemed to strike a vulnerable spot, and she found her confidence crumbling, as if every wall she had built over the years was crumbling before her. She tried, with all her strength, to maintain control over the situation. Her rigid posture still tried to convey authority, but her voice betrayed what she was feeling. "I need to do my job," she said, trying to sound firm, but the insecurity was clear in her words, making her posture, once so convinced, now visibly hesitant. Ricardo, however, did not seem willing to let the situation go unnoticed. He moved even closer, his relentless gaze fixed on Helena. "Did you know that my daughter is an exemplary law student? She's here to build a better future, not steal. What you are doing is a clear case of racial prejudice, and it will not go unanswered," he said with a firmness that made the eyes of everyone around turn to the scene with growing tension. Ricardo's words hit the nail on the head. Helena, who had always considered herself fair and righteous, now found herself facing an overwhelming internal dilemma. Those words were not just an accusation, but a reflection of something she knew could be happening, but never wanted to admit. Ricardo's firm gaze, full of indignation, and the silent support of the crowd, which seemed to share the tension of the scene, began to undermine his confidence. She found herself lost, not knowing how to defend her actions in the face of so many inner voices that were beginning to question the legitimacy of her own stance. Maria, still visibly vulnerable, was next to her father, holding his hand tightly, as if it were the only thing connecting her to the feeling of safety and dignity at that moment. For the first time, she truly felt protected, not by the authority of the police, but by her father's firm support. Something inside her seemed to transform, as if she was finally valued as a good person and not as a suspect in a situation that clearly didn't involve her. Ricardo, with his unyielding tone, continued, "To unmask the injustice of the accusation. Did you know that my daughter is a law student and is here for an interview at the public prosecutor's office? She has nothing to do with this robbery," he shot, with a certainty that seemed to cut the air. Every word carried the weight of her frustration and unshakable belief that her daughter did not deserve to be treated this way. The effect was immediate. Helena, previously so sure of her actions, was left speechless. His mind was paralyzed, not knowing how to respond to such a direct and fair attack, but Ricardo didn't stop there. "You are being prejudiced and unfair. This will not go unnoticed," he declared, his voice now deeper, full of an authority that seemed impossible to dispute. The surrounding crowd, which had been watching silently, now seemed to be waiting for a reaction from Helena. She, in turn, felt the weight of each look, as if the entire square was evaluating her character. And in that moment, she knew something inside her would change no matter what. Ricardo's gaze and the community's silent support were not just a challenge, but a reflection of something bigger, something she could no longer ignore. The silence in the square was absolute. There was no sound of children playing, nor the street vendors attracting the attention of passers-by. Everyone was completely absorbed by the tension of the moment. The crowd's gaze was fixed on Helena, and the pressure she felt seemed almost palpable. She knew that what happened next would carry significant weight, not just for her, but for everyone watching. And it was in this charged silence that Ricardo, with his firm and implacable voice, revealed something that took Helena completely by surprise. "I'm also a human rights defender," he said, his voice piercing the air. "I fight this type of abuse every day, and I will not allow my daughter to fall victim to a flawed system." Those words, like a violent wave, invaded the space and made Helena shudder. For the first time, she was confronted with the gravity of her actions. She always prided herself on being a fair police officer, someone who believed herself to be above any accusations of bias or prejudice. But now, looking at Maria, the young woman she had previously seen as a suspect, she realized that her own actions had been guided by an unconscious bias, a veiled prejudice that she did not want to admit. Ricardo's look, no longer that of an indignant father, but that of a defender of justice, made Helena realize how far she had strayed from the principles she swore to protect. She looked at Maria, no longer as a criminal, but as a young woman full of dreams, with a future ahead of her, a future that she had almost stolen with a baseless accusation. It was in this moment of clarity that Helena, for the first time, felt the true extent of the mistake she had made. Have you ever seen something similar happen? Share your experience in the comments. "I'm sorry, sir. I made a mistake," Helena said, her voice trembling, feeling the weight of her words. She knew that a simple apology couldn't erase what had happened. Maria's tears, which had previously seemed a reflection of fear and injustice, were now a mixture of relief and recognition. She squeezed her father's hand, feeling for the first time truly understood and safe. A small but sincere smile began to appear on Maria's face, as if she glimpsed the possibility of justice, not from the system, but from her father's courage and Helena's humility. Ricardo, with his determined look and his firm stance, knew that that moment did not just represent a personal victory for his daughter, but the beginning of a much bigger fight, something that would go beyond that square and affect the lives of many other people. He knew that Helena, although she was still at a critical point in her trajectory, had taken an important step by recognizing her mistake. And this was not something to be ignored. "It can't go on like this," said Ricardo with a firm voice that echoed across the square, reaching every ear present. We need to change the system, and that starts with people like you, Helena. Are you willing to be part of this change?" The question hung in the air, like a sentence that carried both a challenge and an opportunity. All eyes were fixed on her. The silence was thick, the expectation in the air was palpable, and the crowd seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the answer that would define not only Helena's future, but also the impact of this action on the community as a whole. Helena, still stunned by the revelations and pressure of the moment, felt a mix of intense emotions stirring within her. She knew that this was the crucial choice of her life. It was the decisive moment where she could cling to the old paradigms or open up to something new, something more fair and true. Her heart was beating faster, her body was still tense with the weight of what had just happened, but with a safer and renewed look, she found the strength to respond. "Yes, I'm willing," she replied, her voice now firm but charged with new determination. The square, which had previously seemed a scene of confrontation and tension, was now transformed into a place of renewed hope. The community around Helena began to breathe again, and in an almost unanimous movement, the crowd began to applaud, not only because of Ricardo's words, but also because of Helena's commitment to change. The applause sounded like a milestone, not of completion, but of a new beginning. The sound echoed across the square, breaking the silence in a profound way, marking the beginning of something bigger, something more important. The atmosphere in the square, which until then had been filled with frustration and discomfort, was now permeated with a sense of renewal. And as the sound of clapping echoed in the background, Helena knew she was at the beginning of a journey that would not only transform her, but also everyone around her. Helena, inside, felt an overwhelming weight of guilt and shame. His mind spun, and every thought felt like an echo of regret. The square, which had previously vibrated with daily routine, now seemed like a silent courtroom, where she, the police officer who always believed she was doing the right thing, was being judged and exposed in a ruthless way. The faces that watched her were no longer the ordinary citizens passing by, but an attentive community, which expected more from her, much more. As a police officer, she always believed she was there to protect and deliver justice, but in that moment, the harsh reality of her mistake hit her like a blow. What she had done to Maria was not protection. It was a reflection of a veiled prejudice, something she never imagined she carried. "I'm sorry, sir. I made a mistake," Helena said, her voice shaking, trying to find the strength to say those words. But even as he spoke, the weight of regret seemed to expand in his chest, making it difficult to take every breath. Shame consumed her. Ricardo's voice, calm and imperturbable, resounded in the air, cutting through the heavy silence that surrounded them. Ricardo observed her for a moment, as if measuring the true intentions of her words. He was firm, but he was not indifferent. His gaze was deep and full of wisdom. "Acknowledging a mistake is the first step to change," he said, and those words sank in as an indisputable truth. Those words weren't just for Helena. They were for everyone around her, for the crowd who, until that moment, had been watching from afar, hoping for something more than a simple apology. Ricardo wasn't just talking about Helena. He was talking about the system, about the need for change in all the structures that supported injustice. "My daughter deserves respect and justice, just like anyone else," he added, and his voice was imbued with an authority that made the ground beneath Helena's feet feel shaky. His words weren't just a plea. They were a stark reminder that the justice Helena had sworn to protect was failing in its own court of action. Maria, who was still holding her father's hand with silent strength, felt tears form in her eyes. They were not tears of anger, nor of sadness. They were tears of relief, a profound relief, as if an invisible weight she had been carrying since the accusation was finally being lifted from her shoulders. For the first time since the incident began, she felt that justice was being served, not by a flawed and unpredictable system, but by her father's courage in fighting against that system, and by Helena's ability to genuinely recognize her mistake. Her mother's vision and her father's words made her for a brief moment believe that perhaps there was a chance to turn back the tide of injustice that consumed her. The silence that followed was heavy, dense, like a collective breath that everyone was waiting to release. The murmurs that began to emerge from the crowd were no longer one of distrust, but of a kind of renewed expectation. People looked at Helena with new hope. What once seemed like a simple excuse, an attempt to escape guilt, now became a symbol of something bigger. The crowd no longer wanted to hear empty words. They wanted to see something genuine, something that could restore their faith in justice and humanity. They wanted to see an example of redemption, a testimony of true change. Helena felt the heavy gazes on her, penetrating and silent, but also filled with a new kind of curiosity. It wasn't just unfamiliar faces. They were the people she had sworn to protect and serve. People who, until that moment, she had not been able to see as equals in their suffering and in their daily struggle. She saw each one of them, the ones who were there to remind her of her role, to demand her humanity. She felt as if, at that moment, the entire weight of her profession, her choices and her commitment to the law, was being assessed in a single glance. Ricardo, beside his daughter, said nothing more. He knew that the impact of his words no longer depended on explanations or justifications. He had sown doubt, reflection, and, most importantly, the desire for change. Now, the responsibility was with Helena. She had the power to transform that moment into a milestone, a change not only in her own life, but in the lives of so many other people who were going through similar experiences. What happens next could be the end of a cycle, but it could also be the beginning of something bigger. The destiny of everyone there, Maria, Ricardo, and Helena, was interconnected, and only true courage and the willingness to learn and evolve could transform that day of judgment into a day of renewal and hope. "I never wanted this to happen," Helena said, her voice wavering, almost breaking. His words came out with difficulty, as if the weight of the entire moment was crushing his thoughts. She felt her body tense, her heart racing, and no matter how much she tried to remain firm, it was impossible not to see the truth that was now imposed in front of her. Maria's look, with a mixture of fear and hope, was proof that something fundamental had failed. "I've always strived to be fair," she continued, trying to regain her composure. "But today I failed. I promise to do everything I can to make this right and make sure something like this never happens again." Helena's words, although shaky, were imbued with such profound sincerity that even she was surprised at herself. Never before had she exposed herself in this way, so openly acknowledging the flaw in her judgment. She knew that the phrase, "I made a mistake," would never be enough to erase what had happened, but it was still a step, and in that moment that small step of humility felt like all she could offer. Ricardo, watching closely, saw the internal struggle in her eyes. He could see that, behind the police stance and authority, there was a woman who was being confronted not just by her mistakes, but by something much bigger: the need to see injustice, even when it wasn't visible at first glance. He knew that true justice was not about punishing mistakes, but about learning from them and, most importantly, changing from them. It wasn't about ignoring failures or pretending nothing had happened, but about using that pain to drive real transformation. "If you really want to make a difference, then there is a path ahead of you," Ricardo replied, his voice firm but not merciless. He wasn't offering an easy solution nor a quick way out to ease the tension. His words were not just a comfort, but a call to action. He knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight, but he also knew that that moment could be the turning point for Helena. What he offered was not a simple forgiveness, but an opportunity for rebirth, an invitation for her to join the fight for justice and equality with courage and authenticity. He looked to her with the hope that she would not only repent, but that she would take the reins of this journey, not just to right a wrong, but to transform the system that had contributed to it. Helena felt the weight of these words, and something inside her began to move. The pressure she felt in her chest was no longer related to the fear of being judged, but to the power of this choice that was now before her. She was no longer alone. She now understood that this was the first step on a long and challenging path, but a necessary path. She knew she couldn't do everything at once, but she was determined to take that first step for Maria, for Ricardo, and, most importantly, for herself. The surrounding crowd, who had witnessed every word and every gesture, now seemed to await his response, as if the entire scene was about to transform before their eyes. Helena felt the heavy eyes on her, but instead of being afraid, she now felt a new sense of responsibility. She was faced with a choice that could redefine her career, her beliefs, and even the direction society would take in the face of injustices that, until that moment, she had not seen clearly. "I'm ready," Helena said finally, with a renewed strength in her voice. "I'm willing to change, learn, and fight for justice, not just for myself, but for everyone who, like Maria, deserves to be seen and treated with respect." The square that had previously seemed like a silent battlefield now began to transform. The sound of Helena's words, combined with Ricardo and Maria's reaction, sounded like an echo of hope, a promise that, finally, something was about to change. And in Helena's heart, something was, in fact, changing. She knew the journey would be long, but she was willing to walk the path with courage and determination. And at that moment, the future seemed, for the first time, within reach. As the crowd began to disperse, the weight of the moment still hung in the air, reflected in the expressions of everyone around. For Maria, the young woman felt a deep relief, as if that public confrontation had lifted a burden from her shoulders, bringing her closer to the cure she so desired. She held tight to her father's hand, her refuge and her strength, now more secure than ever, as if what was happening was the first light after a long period of darkness. For Ricardo, the tension of the situation began to dissipate, giving way to a sense of victory, not just for the immediate situation, but for each step he took in the ongoing fight for justice. He knew that this confrontation was not the end, but a milestone in his journey. For Helena, the gravity of the moment still kept her silent, like a wave that enveloped her. She knew she had just crossed an invisible line, that her life and her career would never be the same. The square, which had previously seemed like a silent battlefield, now gradually returned to its everyday routine. The movement of people began. Again. But the scenery was different, the air charged with new energy. People were still exchanging glances, murmuring about what they had witnessed. For many, the episode would not be easily forgotten, but rather a watershed. For Helena, however, it was impossible to go back to what she was before. She knew her journey of redemption was just beginning. The feeling of guilt and shame still accompanied her, but now there was a growing determination in her chest. She had a lot to learn, not just from Ricardo and Maria, but from herself as she confronted the most painful aspects of her beliefs and attitudes. And the community she had sworn to protect and serve now expected more from her, genuine change, not just empty words. Helena made a silent promise to herself at that moment. Every step she took from then on would be a step towards building a more just and humane system. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and that real change takes time. but she felt like this was the path she needed to take. If she wanted to make a difference, the work started there, right then. The next day, Helena arrived at Ricardo's office with a heavy heart of nervousness and a feeling of determination mixed with fear of the unknown. She knew that this meeting could set the course not only of her career, but also of her ability to contribute to real change, something that transcended the simple formality of a job or an investigation. It was a chance to redeem himself, to learn and, above all, to act. The environment in Ricardo's office was formal, but at the same time welcoming. The conference room was well lit, with polished wooden tables and a bulletin board on the wall that was a reminder of the organization's mission and values. The seriousness of the place was not oppressive, but it conveyed a sense of purpose that each conversation there had the power to change something significant. Ricardo was already in the living room, standing by the window, observing the city. His posture, as always, was firm, but the look he gave her when he saw her enter contained no hostility. It was the look of someone who had already seen a lot and knew the weight of words, decisions, and choices. He indicated the chair in front of him, maintaining the same serene composure, but with a hint of expectation in the air. "Thank you for coming," Ricardo said, his voice calm and direct. "I hope you understand the importance of what we are about to discuss." His words, simple and direct, only increased the weight that Helena felt in her chest. It was a reminder that she wasn't there by chance. The conversation that would follow could be the key to personal and social transformation. Helena nodded, trying to control the acceleration of her heart. She knew there was no more room for hesitation, for uncertainty. She was facing a new beginning, and she needed to be strong to live up to what that moment demanded. "I understand, sir," she said with a firmness that tried to disguise her nervousness. "I want to be part of the change." Those words, spoken with new determination, seemed unlike anything she had said before. They carried renewed energy, a clear vision of who she wanted to be, and the decision to follow a more just path. Now, all she needed was to take the right steps, steps that would start in that room, with those words that still reverberated in her mind. Helena responded with such profound sincerity that Ricardo couldn't help but notice. It was as if the words she spoke were not just an attempt to justify herself, but a true confession of a burning desire for change. Something in her eyes shone, as if in that moment she had finally recognized the weight of her actions and the responsibility she was taking on. Those words weren't just empty promises, they were a true offer of transformation. Ricardo, realizing the sincerity in his answer, felt motivated to continue. He began to explain his project enthusiastically, passion brimming in his voice. "We are starting a community initiative that aims to improve the relationship between the police and the community. We need to move beyond labels and stereotypes. We need to address the roots of prejudice and misunderstandings that perpetuate mutual distrust," he said with a steady gaze, as if every word was a tool to rebuild something broken. "This program aims to bring police officers and community members together in a safe environment where we can learn from each other and find constructive solutions. Genuine dialogue is the first step." Helena listened attentively, absorbing each word as if it were a manual for starting over. He felt a mixture of relief and excitement rising within him. Here was the opportunity to make peace with your own mistakes and contribute to something truly transformative. It wasn't just about correcting what she had done wrong, but about being part of something bigger, something that could change many people's lives. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," she replied with a renewed firmness in her voice. "I want to learn, grow, and help others do the same. I want to be an agent of change." The first step of this program was to hold a series of workshops where police officers and community members could finally share their stories, their perspectives, and their experiences in an open and non-judgmental way. Helena found herself in a room full of people from different backgrounds, all eager to share their experiences. The room was filled with a mix of tension and hope, as if each participant was there, not just to teach or listen, but to rediscover themselves through the other's experience. Among all the reports, one moment stood out for Helena in a profound and unforgettable way. Maria, her voice firm but visibly moved, began to share her story. She spoke about the fateful day in the square, that moment that had marked her life in a painful and unfair way. "That day in the square was one of the scariest experiences of my life," said Maria, her eyes teary but her voice unbreakable. "I never imagined I would be treated that way just for being who I am. But paradoxically, it was also an experience that opened my eyes to the possibility of change. I truly believe that if we can come together, if we can truly understand each other, we can create a better future. A future without the barriers that divide us." Maria's words went through Helena like a sharp blade, and she felt a wave of emotion flood her chest. She didn't know that the weight of guilt could turn into something so big, a decision to change. She knew she had a long way to go, but the flame of hope was already starting to ignite within her. This moment, this simple act of Maria speaking her truth, was what finally made Helena understand that she was not alone on this journey. When it was her turn to speak, Helena stood up with her heart racing, but her head clear. She looked at the audience with humility, feeling the heavy gazes on her, but also the weight of her responsibility. "I'm sorry about what happened," he said, his voice shaky but full of sincerity. "I made a mistake, and I'm here to learn, to do better. I know my actions caused pain, and I'm willing to walk alongside all of you to make that right." The workshops continued for several months, and with each meeting, Helena became more deeply involved. She not only listened to the community's reports, but also began to expose herself, to make herself vulnerable in an environment where mutual learning was the basis of everything. With each meeting, she saw the daily difficulties of the people around her and began to understand, in a more visceral way, the realities that she previously ignored. She saw the pain, but also the immense potential for collaboration, for a trust that could be built on truth and empathy. Ricardo, always attentive and observant, followed Helena's progress with cautious optimism. He knew that real change would take time and effort, but he couldn't help but feel encouraged by her dedication. He saw in her a genuine willingness to learn and grow, something that wasn't easy to find. After a particularly successful workshop, where the conversation was profound and transformative, Ricardo approached Helena with a discreet but recognizing smile. "You've come a long way," he said with a slight bow of his head, as if acknowledging the difficult journey of someone who didn't give up. "But remember, this is just the beginning. We have a lot more work to do." Helena, her eyes shining with new purpose, nodded. She knew the road would be tough, but now, alongside people like Ricardo and Maria, she felt that every step forward could lead to real change, not just for herself, but for the entire community. Helena felt something different in her heart, a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. It was as if a switch had been turned inside her, releasing a flood of determination that made her see the future in a completely new way. When she looked at Ricardo with his steady, confident eyes, and at Maria with her silent support and inner strength, something inside Helena lit up. She knew this was not just a step toward personal redemption, but a chance to contribute to something much bigger than herself. "I understand, sir. I am committed to this journey," Helena replied, with a conviction that made her voice vibrate, full of sincerity. These words were not just a promise of empty words, they were a genuine commitment to action. She knew the next few months or even years wouldn't be easy. The path would be long and tortuous, with challenges that would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. But real change always required effort, and she was willing to do whatever it took to contribute her part. As the program progressed, Helena found herself immersed in an ocean of new community projects, educational campaigns, and outreach events, all with the goal of rebuilding bridges between police and the community. Each event was an opportunity to learn, to teach, and most importantly, to listen. She began to understand the complexity of the problems faced by the people around her. Every conversation, every workshop, every day in the field became a lesson in humility and transformation. Ricardo, by her side, was a patient mentor, guiding her with caution and firmness. But what surprised her most was the constant presence of Maria, who, despite all the pain she had faced, was willing to walk alongside Helena in search of justice. Maria's support, the solidarity of a human being who had been wronged, made Helena feel that she was no longer alone on this journey. Together, they were creating a network of empathy and understanding that challenged the barriers of prejudice and intolerance. The battle ahead would be long, no doubt. Helena knew that a flawed system would not change overnight, and that the deep-rooted distrust between people would take time to undo. But she also knew she was part of something historic, something transformative. Every step she took, whether small or big, felt like she was helping to build a stronger foundation for a more just and equitable future. As Helena's journey deepened, she felt increasingly inspired by the stories she heard, the people she worked with, and the immense strength that comes from fighting for a greater cause. With each challenge, she was reminded of the commitment she had made, not just to Ricardo and Maria, but to herself, to the community, and to justice. "I know we have a long way to go," she thought, "but next to people like you, anything seems possible." Helena's journey was just beginning, and she knew that the biggest challenge was yet to come. But as she looked to the future, one thing was clear in her heart. She would never turn back. What was at stake now was more than his career, more than his former beliefs. It was about building a new system, a fairer, more humane, and more egalitarian system for everyone. If you were inspired by this story, be sure to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Get ready, because another incredible story is waiting for you on your screen. And remember, big changes start with small steps, and maybe the next step will be yours.